Hello dear learners, welcome to this SWAYAM NPTEL online course on inclusive education. We are in week 1, that is an introduction to inclusive education, and this is lecture 1, that is inclusive education concept and definitions. During this lecture, we are going to cover concept and meaning of inclusive education, definitions of inclusive education, how inclusive education is related to meeting the needs of all students and not just an issue related to a special needs education. Why to accommodate diverse learners in the regular classrooms? What is the need to accommodate diverse learners in the regular classrooms? In a democratic setup, its citizens must be necessarily educated. Keeping this into consideration, a campaign of education for all has been started in our country for providing opportunities to all its citizens without any discrimination. For providing education for all, a big difficulty has been faced that how can quality school education be provided to the learners with special needs, including the children suffering with one or other types of disabilities. For providing education for these children with special needs, one alternative can be in the form of establishing special schools for them, such as a special school for visually impaired children, hearing impaired children, or a special school for intellectually disabled children, etc. However, this alternative of providing separate provision or school cannot be properly viable solution for the vast population of India having so many disability figures of the prospective learners. Moreover, children may differ significantly in relation to their incapabilities and disabilities. In such a situation, it is very difficult to establish separate schools for each and every types of disability. For example, as for RPWD Act 2016, Government of India has notified 21 disabilities, and if we are going to establish at least one special school for every disability, we have to establish at least 21 special schools, and that is almost impossible. In case we somehow establish special schools at some selective places, then it will not be possible for the children with disabilities belonging to the distant or remote places to come and attend the school on their own. Decidedly, these children should get opportunity to receive quality education at the nearest places possible, without any discrimination on the basis of their disabilities. Such opportunities and provisions of providing quality education to all types of children, including children with special needs, to near or their places of residence, can only be possible through the adoption of philosophy of inclusion in place of segregation. Thus, the journey of inclusive education starts with providing education to children with disabilities in mainstream education system or setup. Let us discuss the meaning and concept of inclusive education. In an inclusive school system, academic and developmental needs of every student are provided with the necessary special instruction and support without labeling them as children with disabilities or special needs or abilities. All the children in all sets of their abilities or disabilities are welcome hereby, making necessary arrangements and accommodation for their education in the same school and classes along with their non-disabled peers. Over the years, the term inclusive education has come to replace the term integrated education. Many people working in the field of education in our country consider these two terms to be meaning the same thing, and often they use these two terms interchangeably. In their words, inclusive education means including children with disabilities in regular classrooms that have been designed for children without disabilities. Although it is true that the journey of inclusive education was started to provide education for children with disabilities in mainstream education system, but we must understand that the term inclusive education means much more than this. Any discussion about the concept or meaning of inclusive education needs to use the Salamanca Statement and Framework of Action, UNESCO 1994, as a reference point. The statement reaffirms the right to education of every individual as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948 and renews the pledge made by the world community at the World Conference on Education for All 1990 to ensure the right to education for all regardless of individual differences. According to Salamanca Statement and Framework of Action, every child has a fundamental right to education, and every child must be given the opportunity to achieve and maintain the acceptable level of learning. Every child has unique characteristics, interests and abilities and learning needs. Education system should be designed and educational programs should be implemented to take into account the wide variety of these characteristics and needs. Regular schools with this inclusive orientation are the most effective means of combating discriminatory attitudes, creating welcoming communities, building an inclusive society and achieving education for all. Moreover, they provide an effective education to all children and improve the efficiency and ultimately the cost effectiveness of the entire education system. The definition of inclusion as recommended by the framework is clearly broader than just disability, as the framework spells out the many different categories of children who may be excluded from the education. The guiding principle that informs this framework is that schools should accommodate all children regardless of their physical, intellectual, social and emotional, linguistic or other conditions. This should include children with disabilities and gifted children, street and working children, children from remote and nomadic populations, children from linguistic, ethnic or religious minorities and children from the other disadvantaged or marginalized areas or groups. We must understand that the term inclusive education means much more than including children with disabilities in mainstream education system. It refers to an education system that accommodates all children regardless of their physical, intellectual, social, emotional, linguistic or other conditions. The range of challenges confronting the school system while including children with diverse abilities and from diverse backgrounds have to be met by creating a child-centered pedagogy capable of successfully educating all children. An inclusive class may have amongst others like children with disabilities or gifted children, street or working children, children from remote or nomadic populations, children belonging to ethnic, linguistic or cultural minorities or children from other disadvantaged or marginalized groups. Now, let us discuss definitions of inclusive education. For understanding meaning and concept of inclusive education in a more comprehensive way, it is required to gather opinion from a well known definitions of the term inclusive education from different scholars from the world. According to M. Manivenan 2001, inclusive education is the implementation of the policy and process that allows all children to participate in all programs. Policy means that disabled children should be accepted without any restrictions in all the educational programs meant for other children. The process of inclusion denotes the ways in the system make it self-welcoming to all. Inclusive education is nothing but making the program for disabled children as an integral part of the general education system rather than a system within the general education. According to Advani and Chadha 2003, inclusive education aims to provide a favorable setting for achieving equal opportunity and full participation for all, thus bringing children with special needs well within the purview of mainstream education. It recognizes the diverse needs of the students and ensures equality education to all through appropriate curriculum, teaching strategies, support services and partnership with the community and parents. In simple words, it means that all children with or without disabilities learn together. According to Michael F. G. Enrico 1997, inclusive education is a set of values, principles and practices that seek more effective and meaningful education for all students regardless of whether they have exceptionality levels or not. According to RPWD Act 2016, inclusive education means a system of education wherein students with and without disabilities learn together and the system of teaching and learning is suitably adapted to meet the learning needs of different types of students with disabilities. According to National Curriculum Framework 2005, inclusion is not confined to the disabled, it also means non-exclusion. Inclusive education thus is just about embracing all. According to UNESCO 2005, inclusive education is a process of addressing and responding to the diversity of needs of all learners through increasing participation in learning, cultures and communities and reducing exclusion within and from education. It involves changes and modifications in content, process, structures and strategies with a common vision which covers all children of the appropriate age range and a conviction that it is the responsibility of the state to educate all children. According to Uppal and Day 2001, inclusive education implies synchronization of the educational needs of the normal children and the educational requirements of the children with special needs so as to evolve a common curriculum with the view to provide education to all in regular schools itself. It is a flexible and individualized support system for children and young people with special educational needs. It provides an integral component of the overall education system and is provided in regular schools committed to an appropriate education for all. According to Steinbeck and Steinbeck 1992, inclusive school or setup may be defined as a place where everyone belongs, is accepted, supports and is supported by his or her peers or other members of the school community in the course of having his or her educational needs met. After going through the discussion of several definitions, now we can conclude that the narrow concept of inclusive education refers to the idea that It is meant only for special children in the general education, but in a true sense or broader concept, it ensures inclusion of all disadvantaged children, including special children in a general school. Again, if the question arises who are to be included, the answer is obvious: students with disabilities, gifted children, street or working children, children for remote or nomadic populations, underrepresented or minority children, socio-economically disadvantaged children, children from LGBTQ, linguistic or cultural minority children, diverse religious identities children, international students, and refugee background students, etc. So, the broad concept of inclusion refers inclusion as a social and educational philosophy that believes that all people are valuable members of mainstream society, whatever their differences and diversities may be in education. This implies that all children, irrespective of their abilities and disabilities, socio-economic background, religion or ethnic, language or cultural background, and gender, go together to the same school. It is the philosophy that aims to improve the quality of education for all children in a classroom. It reflects on human rights and social justice. It is a way to reach out all children. It does not look at whether children are able to follow the regular education system, but looks at teachers and schools in the terms of how they can adapt educational programs to individual needs. So, after this discussion, we can say what is inclusion and what is not inclusion. Inclusion is not about reforms of special education alone, but reforms of both the formal and non-formal education system. Inclusion embraces the diversity of all learners, valuing their unique strengths, challenges, and learning styles. Inclusion is not an event or result, but inclusion is a continuous process of restructuring the policies and practices to address and to respond the diversity of needs of all learners by welcoming and valuing them. Inclusion is not about responding only to the diversity, but also improving the quality of education for all learners. Inclusion is about benefiting all children, not only targeting the excluded. Inclusion is not about additional support to children with special needs within the regular education system, but inclusion is about children in school who feel excluded. Inclusion is not about meeting the needs of children with disabilities only, but inclusion is about providing equal access to education or making certain provisions for certain categories of children without excluding them. Now, we can conclude that earlier inclusion was considered as including children with disabilities in regular classrooms that have been designed for children without disabilities. It is true that the journey of inclusive education was started to provide education for children with disabilities in mainstream education system or setup, but we must understand that the term inclusive education means much more than this. Over the years, inclusive education moves beyond simply placing students in regular classrooms. It advocates for a system-wide transformation of schools and classrooms to ensure that all students, regardless of their learning needs, can participate fully and meaningfully. Regular schools with inclusive orientation are the most effective means of combating discriminatory attitudes, creating welcoming communities, building an inclusive society, and achieving education for all. Moreover, they provide an effective education to the majority of the children and improve the efficiency and ultimately the cost effectiveness of the entire education system. Inclusion as a social and educational philosophy believes that all people are valuable members of the mainstream society, whatever their differences and diversities may be in education. This implies that all children, irrespective of their abilities and disabilities, socio-economic background, religion, ethnic, language or cultural background and gender, go together to the same school. It is the philosophy that aims to improve the quality of education for all children in a classroom. It reflects on human rights and social justice. It is a way to reach out all the children. It does not look at whether children are able to follow the regular education system, but looks at the teacher and schools in terms of how they can adapt educational programs to individual needs. If the students are unable to reach out, the school education must reach out to all the children. There are some references here. Thank you.